Okay, welcome to our Skills Summer Seminars. And today we have something else. We have both a service provider and a law firm participant to talk to us about how to transition to the agent-ready cloud. Interesting, exciting. I want to remind everyone this is a seminar, not a webinar. At any time you could turn on your camera, go off mute and ask your question. Megan and Scott would like you to surprise them, keep them on toe. If you're more of an introvert, just type your questions in the chat. And then the moderator, Kate, is here, and she's going to read your questions if you want it to be that way. The only request we have, write question in all caps, so it's going to be easy to see that you're asking a question. And with that, Scott and Megan, the floor is yours.
We're so excited to be here today and talking to you all. And as Oz said, very, very much wanting this to be a conversation. So as we go, if folks have questions, folks want to jump in and add their own commentary, that's really what this is all about. Maybe just some brief introductions. Maybe Megan, you can start with yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name's Megan McMillin. I'm Senior Practice Innovation Manager at Cleary Gottlieb, former practicing attorney, and jumped over to this side of the world about a month before ChatGPT was released, and haven't looked back. So just loving this industry, everything we're all trying to do together. And thank you always to Oz for bringing us together as a community. I was welcomed early on and with open arms, and I love working with all of you to kind of figure this all out together. So thanks for having me.
Good timing, by the way, joining 2 months before ChatGPT. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Kelly. I'm a Senior Director of Product at NetDocuments. I'm over all our AI automation and search solutions. In a past life, I was a civil rights attorney for a couple of years before running a startup for about 6 years until I was acquired by NetDocuments, where I've been for the last 4 years. Man, it's been a while. Yeah, really looking forward to diving into this topic. In terms of the agenda, we're actually going to start with a little bit of a taste of the future and then work backwards to present readiness. So we're going to start by talking about what is an agent. I mean, that I feel like a lot of conversations these days always start with, okay, let's make sure we're actually talking about the right thing. So, or at least the same thing. So defining what an agent is and why it matters, like what kind of use cases it can truly unlock. And then really diving into what it means to be ready, both from a organizational perspective and an architectural readiness perspective. And then broadening out to Q&A. We have a dedicated portion for Q&A, but we really want to encourage you at any time to jump in, ask your questions, add your commentary. So yeah, defining agents. When Megan and I were talking about this, we feel like there's so many different terms out there, agents, workflows, LLMs, and everything in between, that it was important to really stake out like what is really different about an agent. So maybe starting with workflows, which is something that many of us are familiar with. It's a system where LLMs and tools are orchestrated through predefined code paths. This is coming directly from Anthropic's great article at the end of 2024 explaining that difference between workflows and agents. And the key here is predefined. This looks a lot like traditional code in the sense that it's deterministic. It's routed exactly where you want it to go. That's a workflow. An agent is very different, right? It's allowing the LLM to actually direct its own processes, its own tool use, so that it can maintain control over its tasks. Now, one of the things we think is really interesting here is just maybe stepping through exactly what that looks like in practice. So let's start with a workflow. With a workflow, you have, like I said, that deterministic decision tree that you've probably worked with, not just in building workflows with LLMs, but with any kind of software. You might have, for example, some sort of input from a form or from a user, that then gets directed to an LLM. And then there's a gate, and depending on, maybe if something evaluates to true or to false, it's either going to go down one path or another path. And then there will be some sort of output, or the program will exit. Thinking about how to govern, how to organizationally prepare, how to architect around this looks a lot like thinking about preparing for traditional software. And so that's, while we'll touch on workflows as we go through this conversation, it's not going to be the main focus. The main focus is going to be on this, which looks a lot different. An agent is sort of definitionally non-deterministic. And really the area to focus on is where the AI is exercising its own discretion on when and how to proceed. So you see, until the task clear or until the test pass, the agent is actually evaluating, okay, here's my goal. Have I accomplished that goal? Well, no. Okay, then let me try again and again. And it has this sort of inbuilt recursion that we as humans have when we're trying to accomplish a goal, where we try different things out. And then based on that goal, we decide whether to move forward or not.
So Scott, I'll just jump in for 1 second. So when we were going through this, what came to my mind was that when we think about work, when I think about workflows, I sort of immediately think about sort of like Power Apps or something where we're putting together two different steps, but we're telling it exactly what to do. There might be, what feels to me like some complication or some process that feels like a decision is being made, but it really isn't. We're telling it what to do depending on a circumstance, so sort of an if then or something like that. There isn't any element where the 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 software or the platform is kind of making a decision or making a judgment. But then when we're looking, when we were sort of walking through some of the examples, when we're looking at what's happening behind the scenes in agentic work, there really is a determination of, okay, well, that didn't answer the question, so I need to try again. Really, really like working with a colleague or someone that's actually understands what the ask was and if it's been resolved versus just following what you told it to do.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, one of the paradigm shifts, even as a company that develops this technology, is thinking about the ways that building for a colleague is different than building a tool. And we'll get into that a little bit on the architectural side of things, how that really impacts everything from security to how you coordinate technologies to the type of collaboration you want to enable and how that's enabled. But I think this single insight that you're talking about, right? Thinking of an agent as a colleague, not a tool, is a paradigm that you can use when evaluating so many different ways that you can use this technology within your organization. Great. So definitions out of the way, let's get into, I think, why in many ways we're all here, which is what can agents actually do for us? Like what is the true value? And that's something that I think all of us are still wrapping our heads around. I mean, we're just at the beginning, the early innings of, I think, a world that is in many ways powered by and designed for agents. And you'll see changes in organizations as a result of this. You'll see changes in how technology is architected. But why all this change? Like, what justifies all this effort that all of us are going through? I think it's helpful to just step through an example, just a single example, just to really understand the power. So here's a basic one. It's near and dear to my heart because it's something we think a lot about internally on NetDocuments, but researching questions based on firm work product, right? This is something we all as lawyers have done a million times, or legal professionals or paralegals, anyone working a law firm at one point or another has said, okay, we have some question, we have a lot of internal data, documents, sources that we can go through to answer that question. It's time to start searching. And with an agent, that looks a lot more like an interaction with a person, right? So I could go and say, okay, I need to talk to my assistant. type in a question like, how did the composition of some company's board change, in this case, Acmeco's board change between some date range, in this case, 2015 and 2020, and then you get, a portion of time where it's actually doing the work. In this case, maybe it takes 40 seconds, and then it comes back with a response. Now, at first, this might seem really trivial. It's like, wait a minute, hasn't this been around for the last 3 years with kind of RAG-based chatbots, right? Isn't this just normal RAG-based chatbots? Agents are very, very different. And I think this example is a very telling one because, again, we all saw, 2.5, 3 years ago using ChatGPT, maybe pointing at a document or a set of documents. You could ask a question, and then it would sort of naively go grab a bunch of chunks of text from those documents, pull them back in, and throw that into a context window and try to answer it. But I think many of us have seen that that is not how you actually get to an accurate answer. In order to get to an accurate answer, you need an agent to actually do what a human would do, what a colleague would do. And that's what this is, right? So I like looking at just this single paragraph and thinking about all of the steps that an agent will go through to actually get to this one paragraph of an answer, right? So agents typically will start with some sort of goal or some sort of plan. So in this case, it's, okay, my goal is to build a timeline of board seats from 2015 to the end of 2020. I need to identify every change around directors. And I'm going to start by casting a wide net. So this is like, if you think about it, this is a lot like what an associate would do when tasked with this exact task. And then you can actually see the log of the queries that are being done. Okay, there's a board of directors. Maybe I'll search for that key term, right? And if you're using a system like a DMS, you can also apply the attributes that matter. So in this case, the client that matter, maybe some date span that matters. But maybe it's not just one query you're doing. You might run multiple queries, and that's what the agent will do. We'll try a couple of different attempts, board of directors, board roster, and then when it identifies a promising looking document, it can actually open it up. So it's using different tools it has, a query tool, a fetch tool, or in this case, an open tool to actually examine the contents of these various documents and get you to that answer for that first part of the question. And then it goes ahead and says, okay, yeah, I've identified the 6 names from 2015 that are kind of the baseline, right? Those were the 6 people that were on the board of directors at the very beginning. So we've got our baseline, and now the next step is to say, okay, what's changed? And so we run another query, right? And this is just for this one paragraph. All this effort is going into answer it. But if you think about it, it's very much what you or I or anyone else tasked with this would have to do. We wouldn't run one query and just throw the documents into a Word document and then try to answer it. We run multiple queries iteratively to get to the answer we wanted. In this case, you run maybe another search and you find, okay, it looks like that last query didn't find anything relevant. Let me try another approach. So that ability for the agent to actually evaluate whether the outputs it's getting are what it needs to accomplish its goal, I think are canonically what agents are all about. That's self-evaluation. And in this case, it leads to a refined search. So additional searches, and with the second search, we're actually getting to what we want. And that's all to answer this one sort of part of this question. And I think that's really the power of agents. Great. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. So,
Scott.
go ahead.
Sorry,
please.
Megan. There aren't any questions in the chat, but I have a question. So when you do that, you said about not interrupting the agent during any of this, you get the output. But can you investigate the reasoning and the research, how it tore apart the question to discover its answer? Or is that, yes, there are references to what it found, but is there a way of figuring out what it queried, whether the dates were correct? Like, can you, because of course you can do that with a colleague.
Showing your work.
There you go, showing your work. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think so the answer, 2.5 years ago was no. You just kind of there's input in, output
Trust.
out, right? Um, but today, for example, what I'm showing you is we've been working on a POC internally of this kind of agentic workflow, where you go beyond just simple RAG-based question answering. And as part of that, one of the key principles is a thinking trace. So what you're seeing here is actually a thinking trace. It's like,
Right.
okay, the planning agent is making a plan. And then the next step is, okay, I'm searching. And each of those queries represent an individual tool use. So I'm using the query tool to query board of directors. I'm using the query tool to query board roster. You're seeing exactly what metadata I'm applying. So this whole trace would be what would be available to you through an agentic flow. If you've ever used like a ChatGPT Enterprise and done deep research, it's the same idea. It has essentially a ledger that exposes its thinking to you. Now, the ledger is itself a roll-up of the kind of deeper thinking that's going on. You're not seeing everything that the agent itself is seeing, but it's essentially writing a report to you of what it's thinking. So you do have more trust in the output. And we've actually seen that, internally on NetDocuments. One of the things we're always doing is kind of iterating on system messages. So like maybe 1 month we'll get feedback from users about, okay, I want this or I want that. And so we'll do these iterations. And one thing that we found in iterating was that for legal professionals, they actually prefer to see the agent's plan ahead of time, where it says, here's what I'm going to do, so that you can sort of correct it. You can say, no, don't search just those terms, search these other terms, right? So that's something that we do today is we have it always plan ahead of time so people can kind of intercept that and redirect.
Right. Thank you.
Awesome. And Kate, that's sort of a great segue, actually, just in terms of thinking through, I don't know about anyone else on the call, but when I see that example, right, I like get super excited about the possibilities, and then also sort of immediately get a stomach ache and think about like, okay, wait, how, what's happening behind the scenes to make, because we all know too much, right? Like we know what needs to happen to get there. So when we think about, obviously it's wonderful to have new technology, but I think we've all also lived through having new technology that we very clearly weren't ready for, right? And so we're sort of just, we're left with ideas and not really a way to make anything happen. So, when I start thinking about like, okay, where do we need to start, and sort of where are we? I think probably we're all along this spectrum somewhere right now, right? Like to get here, we need to really look at, have we fully moved to be sort of cloud ready, right? Like, so I think if we're still in a world at our firms, at our companies, where we're very much either actually still on-prem or in that sort of like on-prem mindset where there's like very, very much sort of this desire and experience around hands-on ownership of our tools. I think that's where we sort of need to make sure we're taking the right approach in shifting that culture. I think what we're looking at there is, sort of some new expertise, new roles, new ideas, but mainly this comfort around it's no longer sort of down the hall in the server room, right? Like this is no longer something that we're controlling, kind of, on our side, right? And then so once we sort of make that shift, and we get comfort around that, then we're moving into sort of our AI ready, right? And then we start thinking about, great, now we're enabled from a technology, very basic level of technology where we can actually have these tools, but like sort of who's looking at them? How are we deciding, what data are these tools able to look at? Who is looking at what the output is, and who's determining if, this is sort of firm quality output, and what is the governance we're putting on that? So I think, a lot of us are in that world right now, right? Thinking about sort of governance around AI, training, training, our lawyers and our professional staff, but then also just sort of the training model in general, right? Are we using these tools for training? So there's a lot of stuff sort of in that AI ready. And then when we start thinking about agent ready, I think that's where we really have to lean into the fact that these are like very, very different roles we need to think about. So the fact that, Scott's talking about sort of this capability that really is more like a colleague than technology, like, what does that mean? Does that mean that, let's say give an agent an assignment and it comes back, who is deciding that that's the right quote unquote answer, right? Do we have this benchmark? When Scott and I were talking about this, it immediately reminded me of sort of like early days of KM, where we spent so much time getting consensus around what was the right stock purchase agreement template, right, for a practice group or for a partner, right? Like it got that specific on how are we defining these things. So thinking through that, it's very, I love where we're headed. I love it. I just thinking through, are we going to have to do this at sort of a lawyer by lawyer level of what they call the right output, and who's doing that and who's benchmarking, testing, training. And these are just all roles that I just don't think most of us have, right? So thinking through that is, it looks like you have a comment on that.
I have a question for Scott. Are we dealing with something that's just a transitional question, and in 2 years, things will get so much better, given how much better they got recently, that we're not going to, the issue of supervising what comes out of the agents is going to be, it's going to be just as accurate as could be, because it learned in the last 2 years and it got so much better, and the LLM itself is better, and the system became so much better that you don't have to worry about it. And then you should answer Megan's list of questions.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I mean, I think if you plot the dots, right, the clear arc is towards better, faster, cheaper. And the clear arc is towards better than people in most ways. But that being said, I have really smart friends, Yale law grads, Harvard law grads, all these really smart people, and they make mistakes, right? So I don't think any firm, even with their most experienced attorneys, their most experienced legal professionals generally, is going to completely see the idea of some kind of supervision or review. And I think that also is particularly the case with agents, because one of the attributes that they have that humans don't is they're very fast and they're self-replicating. So imagine a world where you give a task to an agent, and I don't think we're that far from a world where the agent turns around and says, "Oh, I'm going to spin up 10 more agents to do this," right? Actually, yesterday, Claude announced the idea of sub-agents. I'm sure many of you follow Ethan Mollick on LinkedIn. He's a professor from UPenn, who writes a lot about AI, and he's been doing some experiments with ChatGPT agent, having it actually open new versions of itself. So even if these agents are highly accurate, if they make a small mistake and then it's compounded at the velocity that agents can go, and at the scale that they can scale to, it can get very scary very fast. So I think those guardrails are always going to be very important.
Yeah, that's a great question, Oz. And I think honestly, even that concept of the fact that this is iterative and changing daily also makes this really challenging, because that's not historically. And I'm speaking from the law firm perspective, and having been at many law firms through the course of my career. So not necessarily current day, but just sometimes it's hard to move quickly, right? And there is that consensus decision making, and it's just not the way that we've worked before. And there's a lot of black and white thinking of like, well, we can't do that because of this, that, and the other thing. And they're not wrong, right? It does feel like something we can't do, but we also can solve for it. And that's where I think we're trying to sort of lean into is sort of, yes, that's true. There are risk concerns, there are governance concerns. But I think we need to solve for it. And that's, we can do that. We're capable of that. And so that's sort of the push that we're trying to take, is sort of yes, and so it isn't sort of a hard no.
I think the point to keep in mind, I think AI in general does give us best historical average result, right? So it's never going to give you the new frontier. It's never gonna, but it will get much better at giving you best historical average reply to your question, right? And I think that's the point where the hallucination and the mistakes and all those things that it does today probably will disappear. You still want the human to make sure this is the direction we want to go from here, because sometimes we say this is the time to make a, until now we accepted always Delaware, right? Delaware law was great, but then California law just changed and it seems to be more appealing, and now we're going to go shift to the right. So even though historically it's correct to say Delaware, now we're going to make a shift to something else. And until AI can actually think, which it cannot, I think we always need the human to drive it. But I think it just will be much more accurate in terms of the reflection of the historical data that you pointed at.
Yeah, I agree, Oz. And I think kind of even going back to Kate's question, and all of this, right? Like, I think this is just like we sort of need to, it's like, feels like an all hands on deck a little bit in the terms of pulling in sort of like, our IT departments, our risk departments, our lawyers, innovation, KM, and all L&D, learning and development, figuring out exactly all of these points. And, I know later, and when Scott gets into some of his architectural readiness, looking at sort of these very, very granular benchmarking and testing that needs to happen on every part of that. I can't remember what you called it, the thinking tree. That's not what you said, but that's what I heard. But every part of it, right, needs to be validated, and someone needs to decide, actually, no, it should have been, X, Y, Z. And again, thinking through the KM model, like, that's not easy, right? Like, coming up with those answers, even though it sounds easy, when you ask someone, like, what would the output of a very strong second-year associate look like? Wildly different answers are coming back. So who's determining what the right, quote unquote, right answer is? When, I think everything depends on that answer, right? Like, these are ultimately, sure, we can say colleagues, but ultimately these are machines. And so we are deciding what's right or what's most historically accurate. Anyway, so, basically, I think I think we just need to sort of start now in figuring out the new roles that we need. So that's sort of my, like, too long didn't read of all of this, is that, kind of even, again, my head goes to sort of cloud, AI, agent. This all still feels, quote unquote, new a little bit at law firm. I'm speaking again at firms, and just really leaning into that as sort of, how would we know how to do this, right? Like, this isn't the skill set that's been here before. We absolutely need the skill set that's been here before. We need everyone, right? This is just different. So I just think leaning into that, looking at what that actually means, whether that's bringing in, consultants to sort of help you along the way, or actual new roles where you do start looking at change management, you start looking at AI operations managers. Like, this is just where we are headed. And I think the more we can get ahead of it, the less frustration we're going to find by trying to fit it into a structure that doesn't support this.
Yeah, and just to build on that point, I mean, we see it a lot. I mean, I have the privilege of, talking to a lot of our customers and a lot of prospects, across the globe. And one of the things that's become very apparent is, depending on the firm and the organization, who actually owns or doesn't own this effort varies tremendously. Like, sometimes it's firmly the CIO, right? It's all the CIO. They're thinking about it. Sometimes it's, no, don't even talk to the CIO. You need to talk to the KM and the innovation team. They own, it all rolls up to them. We've also seen, I think, you're pointing out this sort of like new role or new expertise. We've seen kind of the COO of AI, or kind of a special project lead for AI, who's specifically there to bring together different people from IT, from risk, from training, from KM, to build that kind of cross-departmental collaboration that's needed for this what many firms I think view as mission critical effort. And then even more interestingly, because again, being on the legal tech side for a long time, it was very hard to talk to a managing partner a lot of times. Like they were too busy, their time was, too valuable. But now that's really, really shifted. And a lot of times the folks who are making these strategic decisions are at the highest levels of the sort of partner hierarchy, and trying to navigate this new world. So it really varies by firm, and I don't think
That's actually
there's
that point is so huge, Scott, because I think that right there is where friction lies a little bit. And I don't think everyone's trying to head in the right direction, but the reality is that it it is completely, a new world to have managing partner or really anyone outside of IT making decisions on technology, right? It's just
Mhm.
why would that be? But this is not really just this is a strategic mission critical to your point, but also the technology choice is not a small decision anymore. Like this is actually the future of the firm. But that, again, doesn't fit with sort of the historical um, roles, hierarchy, and the way it currently works at a lot of firms and companies. So I think that friction is just, again, I keep saying, but I think you just have to talk about it and acknowledge it instead of it being sort of this like, well, actually, I think we're going to try to decide, like, just get everyone together. And I love the idea of someone that's job is literally to connect the dots, because that is, I think, exactly what this is in a wonderful way. I love the idea of sort of the collaborative team. It doesn't it doesn't go with sort of the history of law firms, and that it's a wonderful direction we're headed in. But just to alleviate the friction as much as possible, I think you just have to lean into it.
Yeah, that would be one interesting thing just to hear in comments, or if people want to hop on, just who is owning that at their organization. Is it a special role that's been carved out, or is it kind of going under sort of more traditional roles? Great. Do you want to speak to processes and policies?
Oh, yeah. So I guess just thinking through again, like kind of as we look at, like, I think what we're trying to do is get ahead so that we're trying to be proactive, right? So when we look at even our AI policies, and now we're really digging into sort of data governance, data strategy, is just optimizing for where we're headed instead of just sort of hitting where we are. I know that sounds obvious, but again, I think typically we're always kind of playing, I feel like we're playing catch up a lot where we're sort of like, okay, wait, we need to get a policy, but now we're actually now starting to even think about, when we work with vendors and looking at our like form of MSA, again, thinking about where we're headed and trying to already think about what these provisions need to look like or what we need to be doing on our end, um, to kind of just be ready,
Yeah.
bringing in the right talent, bringing in the right, like quote unquote like informal policies of the way that we all work together at the firm, right? Kind of getting that aligned so that we can move quickly, as these tools get better every day and as sort of agentic becomes a reality.
Yeah. And I mean, just as much, I think, as you have to make that organizational change, there are so many novel architectural issues, I think, with how firms have to think about, actually building around, and whether it's selecting tools or building tools, or refurbing existing tools to be ready for this incredibly powerful unlock that agents promise. And so what I've done is sort of taking that idea that you should think of agents as a colleague, and not a tool, just showing how it applies to different areas of your architecture, and of the interfaces that your users are interacting with, to kind of see how that changes things. So user experience is a really good example. So if you think about most tech tools, they're all about configuration, right? It's I have a form, I answer questions on a form, I move some dials here or there, and that produces, an outputted document or something like that. But with agents, again, thinking of them as colleagues, the grain of design, the co-founder of the company that I founded a while ago, he always used to talk about this concept of design having a grain, and that when in doubt, you wanted to cut with the grain of that design. And with new platform shifts, you have new design grains that emerge. And so I think with the platform shift of large language models and how that has enabled agents, what you're seeing is a new grain of design that's centered around this idea of collaboration. So I think, the one we're all familiar with, obviously, is a chatbot, going back and forth, being able to have that natural conversation. But I think there's other modalities that haven't traditionally been used in legal that you're going to start to see more and more of. So another example is like, maybe I'm just walking down the street and just like I would call up a colleague, maybe I record a note or I call up an agent to get something done. I think voice, it used to be thought of as more of a consumer interface, or even in consumer applications, there weren't many examples of voice as an interface, but I do think we're seeing a shift where that could become extremely important, just as chat has become extremely important. And so as you're looking at tools, again, whether to buy or to build, whatever it is, I think one thing to be really, really keenly evaluating is, are they cutting with the grain of this paradigm shift? Are they, is the design that you're seeing oriented around agent as colleague or agent as tool? And that could be, something that's very powerful as it plays out over time. Great. Coordination. I know we talked a lot about this, Megan. So maybe you could set this up a little bit in some of the, the wild world of evaluating all the different tools out there and deciding, what's what and what makes sense to use.
Yeah, no, great. And as Scott and I were talking about this in prep for this call, I actually kept interrupting him and just asking questions. I was like, "This is not about the session, but actually, what do you think about blah blah blah?" And then I just realized, actually, I think this would probably just be helpful to talk about because we're probably all thinking very similar things. So, all these tools are wonderful in their own ways and in similar ways. In many ways, we have a bunch of these. We have available to us a bunch of these tools at my firm. What we're starting to we're trying to figure out or starting to look at and really trying to design is, many of these tools and many others now also have what you're talking about as sort of these, I'm going to say workflow builders, but it actually is sort of more agentic, right? Like they're sort of giving us the ability to piece together different steps of process and then adding in the element where, there is some, like, I'll just say the word reasoning going on before it makes a decision. I guess what we're trying to figure out and would love to hear if others are struggling with this or have thoughts on this is, how do you figure out like how to navigate when there's a lot of convergence? And so let's say, we have 4 of these tools and they all now offer a workflow builder that sort of looks pretty similar. And sure, one might be better than the other at something, but trying to figure out, if we go all in on using this workflow builder over here on this tool, does that mean that we're limiting what we can do over here on sort of the workflow builder that's in the research tool? So just trying to think about from like a person that is not technical in the sense of knowing what's happening behind the scenes, like, is there a better way, a best way to look at how to put these together to be like one platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part, that you spoke about before getting to your question about this kind of convergence you're seeing. I mean, we see it everywhere where, one tool starts out maybe as an assistant and then moves over into workflow and maybe into a Word add-in. In our case, we actually started out with workflow, and then we, last year went into an assistant. And then obviously search is another one that we see more and more folks gravitating towards. And I think it can be disorienting, and it can be like, okay, am I supposed to pick one and just hope it sort of wins and it's the best in breed, or can I put them together? And I think the answer, nobody knows for sure, but our view, and I think the view of many folks that I talk to at other legal tech organizations, is that it's unlikely that there's going to be one dominant solution, because if you think about it, what would that look like? It would be like, okay, let's say it's Copilot, right? Copilot has a list of 10,000 actions that are available to it, right? Because it needs to be able to reach into your private data, your DMS. It needs to be able to reach into maybe your legal research tools, and you have a couple of those. It needs to be able to maybe go out to your e-discovery platform and do queries there. It needs to be able to reach out into your workflow builder and do things there. And oh, by the way, it also has to deal with all the business admin tools that you might have. So you're connected to Bamboo HR or Workday, it has tools for that. Suddenly, the list of tools that are available for Copilot as the sort of master agent to operate on becomes overwhelming. And one thing that we've seen in testing, and I think many people have, is that the broader the array of tasks that you're asking an agent to take care of, the less likely it is to be successful. If you can have dedicated sub-agents that are really specialized around what they do best, I think you get the best results. And so that's why we think, the future of these agents it's not a this or this. I think in a lot of cases it's this and this. And it's making sure when you're evaluating these tools or you're building your own tool, that you're building it with an eye towards maybe this isn't the everything machine. Maybe this isn't going to accomplish all the tasks we want, but rather it's going to play a dedicated role in a vertical stack.
And
And I'll talk a little
Scott,
bit
on that question, on that point. So we know that Claude and Google Gemini are creating a platform for agents to talk to each other.
Mhm.
Do you see the same thing happens in legal? Like on search, I know I'm missing Deep Judge, which also index things that come from other places. And
Mhm.
do you think that the different logos that we see on the screen here are going to talk to each other and will enable, there's going to be a clearinghouse, a place where you come to activate your agents. I know one firm I'm working with, they don't tell you the name of the tools, just ask you the use cases. And they might flip them as they see something better. You just say, I need summarization. And it opens without you necessarily knowing which is the vendor that you're dealing with. You just get your use case solved. And they kind of created the clearinghouse. But other firms are still sitting on the bench trying to figure out what do I do with this? Like there are all those vendors I work with, they all claim to be, I'm now AI. So which one is it? And we tried Copilot and didn't really work. So we tried AI, and like, what's the future and how do you see collaboration among the different vendors?
Yeah, I think that really nicely leads into kind of this next piece that we were planning on discussing, which is it's not just about having the right tools, it's about having the tools that are surfaced in the right way. And so, you just mentioned it. And maybe there are across these different solutions, there's, summarization tools, there's extraction tools, there's timeline tools, there's legal research, there's search across your internal documents, custom tools you built with a workflow, tool, and they're all from all these different vendors. Well, how would you put those all together traditionally? Well, traditionally, you would build a lot of really complicated API bridges between all these different tools. And as someone who's worked a lot with APIs over, my career, APIs can be brittle. Someone can change the specification. A new one can be a new tool could be added, and every time a new endpoint is added, you as a vendor have to, go and build to that. And even more difficult, right, is any change is compounded across all the different integration points. So, as an example, if NetDocuments were to add a new endpoint for doing something with NetDocuments, then every single connected application, third-party application that wanted to consume that endpoint would traditionally have to now build a bridge to that endpoint. And so it's a ton of work for everyone. And what I think is really, really exciting, I think maybe what you're hinting at is what the future looks right. The future is actually the present, it's happening right now as we speak. Like in NetDocuments, we've built some of these internally. It's model context protocol. So this is essentially an API layer for agents, specifically built for agents. And it was originally developed by Anthropic as an open source initiative, but very excitingly, I think to everyone in the AI ecosystem, now OpenAI has said, you know what, we believe that this is the standard. So now that you have Anthropic behind it, you have OpenAI behind it, you have Google behind it, it is the standard. I mean, the major players have bought in. And so that gives everybody downstream as legal technology companies the confidence to say, okay, this is the standard we should build to. And what's so exciting about this is if you build one of these MCP servers, is what they're called, it's a single integration, right? You build a single, essentially think of it as almost like a single agent endpoint. And when another agent hooks into it, it gets all of the tools that are connected to that particular player kind of for free. It's not like they're building a custom integration with summarization and extraction and timeline and searching across the DMS and custom tools. They can make one connection to the NetDocuments MCP server, and that actually allows for them to hook into all those tools. And better yet, as we add new tools, those new tools automatically will get surfaced through this server. So the next time an agent like ChatGPT or a Legora or a Harvey or a Deep Judge, whatever's on top of this, right? The next time they reach into the NetDocument server, they'll just call up the list of tools and they'll say, hey, there's a new tool there. There's a new tool for me to get my job done. So the ease with which you can integrate with agents and a standard like Model Context Protocol, I think is in many ways revelatory. And internally, we're extremely excited to be building towards that future.
So to take back to Megan's question, what do we need to do as law firms to prepare for that environment? What homework do you assign to us?
Yeah, I think the biggest homework is if you're building internally, I would highly, highly recommend, looking into this protocol and any tool orchestration you're doing with your agents, making sure it's using Model Context Protocol. And there's great cookbooks that are out there, both from OpenAI and Anthropic, showing how to use this. But then from a vendor evaluation standpoint, I think I would put the question to the vendor. I'd say, hey, what is your vision for the future of integration? Is it, a bunch of closed down APIs? Is it that kind of traditional bridge, or is it a future-ready MCP server? There are definitely unique security concerns and issues that need to be worked through, but we do believe that this is extremely powerful. And let's just say over the coming weeks, we'll probably have some cool things to share about how we're thinking about working with other folks. Great. So a couple more topics on the architectural, side of things that we wanted to go through were, and this is something I think Megan did a great job of, surfacing earlier, is this idea of how you actually evaluate non-deterministic systems like an agent. So like with a deterministic system, it's very easy to say, is it working or not, right? Because you go down the decision tree and you say, hey, I went down that decision tree and it didn't give me the input it's supposed to, it didn't give me the output it was supposed to give me. But when you're trying to evaluate the quality of essentially a colleague, well, how do you do that, right? It's actually quite hard and something that I think everybody is still grappling with. I don't know if folks saw this the other day, but one of the big benchmarks that's being used is called the last exam of humanity. And recently, some biologists actually went through it and they said, you know what? We think in 30% of cases, the benchmark is wrong. So even people who have built whole organizations around benchmarking and are really trying to create good benchmarks, they struggle in this new non-deterministic world. And so what I would say to especially, larger firms like the folks on this call is you likely have the internal capacity to develop your own set of benchmarks that anytime you're evaluating a tool, just run it against that. This is a very kind of basic example of an eval, but I think points to, something that, a framework for how to set up your evals. And whether it's 10 or 20 or 200, I think starting with something is better than nothing. And so usually what we recommend is you have some sort of defined input, so you can just run that input again. usually some sort of categorization. Like in this case, I'm categorizing this as a guardrail because let's say the assistant doesn't have access to the web. So what you don't want it doing is hallucinating and saying, oh, today's date is when my, cutoff, my knowledge cutoff was, right? You want it to say, I don't know the date because I don't have access to the internet. So you describe that expected behavior. Sometimes in our evals, we'll have linked documents. So we'll be like, we want to test these specific questions against these specific documents. So that's something that's often included. And then, model version. And then here's something I really, stress is because outputs are non-deterministic, you really want to test it not once, not twice, but at least 3 times to make sure you're getting a consistency of good outputs. So in this case, I'm saying every time we tested this eval with this model and this tool, the test was passed. So that's a human looking at and say true or false, right? And then if you do want to start to programmatically evaluate outputs, what you can do is you can take an example of a golden answer and you can actually use an LLM to say, hey, here's the golden answer. Here's the answer I did get. Is this actually correct? The problem there is it's a bit of a Ouroboros, right? It's, LLMs eating themselves. So you can get into some snarls there where maybe your benchmark is not being evaluated the way you want. So. Great. And then I think a final area, and maybe Megan, you could, we talked a lot about this in terms of how you think about, the guardrails you're putting on AI tools, not just on the people using those tools. Maybe speaking to kind of this idea of just because the user has access doesn't necessarily mean the agent should, and like outside counsel
Yeah.
guidelines.
Yeah, totally. So I think, in talking through just sort of the amount of sort of like real time, even looking at the evals, by the way, I got like a stomach ache again because I'm thinking about like what happens when, sorry, and I'll get into this in a second, but what happens when the model changes, right? So then do you need to evaluate 3 more times? Like Scott and I we were going through this and we were talking about, I was mentioning sort of like the day or the few days where sort of, I think it was 4.0 kind of like went off the rails and was just acting like everything I said was amazing. And I honestly was like, wow, I'm like on today. And then, all this news came out that 4.0 was sort of, malfunctioning and like, anyway, so thinking through if we have these evals, but then there's a model change, like could that actually change the behavior? And then do we need to be kind of real time running these evaluations to catch that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. What I would say is yes, unfortunately. And that's why I think knowing what models your provider uses, or at least when they're changing models so that you can rerun tests is so important because oftentimes with models, what you see is maybe they get better at 5 different things, but maybe they get a little bit worse at two things. And those 2 things sometimes might be the 2 things that you really, really care about, right? That's why having your own benchmarks that run, I think, can be really important. I think a question was asked in the chat.
Just on the security, just I know we're getting to time, because I do think this is important. So I think thinking again through sort of the frameworks that are in place now at a firm, right? So we think a lot about permissioning in our DMS or permissioning across our data sources. What's happening now, though, right, is if we have access not only to the data, but then access to tools, how are we looking at that? Because we have, and this is literally happening right now, so this is not like a fake example, we have clients that have approved the use of AI only for specific tasks within a matter. So you can use AI, their data on AI, or their work product, you can use AI for, like, let's say closing binders. So we need to have a way on our end to tell the technology that. And currently I think it's a struggle to even tell the technology that it's restricted, right? That it isn't sort of that regular ethical walls type restriction, but now we're talking about this data is restricted from a tool. So it's not about being restricted from another person or, just it's a whole new level of sort of thinking about security. Instead of it being about user access, it's about tool access, and we're going to have to look at it not only at the client level, but the matter level, but the which tool, and then at the task level. That's just something that I think just has not been done.
Yeah, and what we're finding is we're having to, architect pretty novel capabilities within NetDocuments. Like this is an example. We have a way to set rules, and then based on those policies and based on how a particular document or a workspace or a client is profiled, or like what metadata is on them, you can decide what can actually be done in the context of that client, that matter, or that document. And one area where we've had to pull some things up on a roadmap, because we were just hearing so many of our customers that need this, is the ability to not only restrict AI or allow AI in a particular case, but actually to break that out more granularly, like you said, Megan, right? Because, for example, you'll see that there's two policies there at the bottom. There's AI search and there's AI assistant. So these are both capabilities that we either have released or are releasing over the next several months, and they operate differently. So, for example, AI search isn't using an LLM; it's using an embeddings model, more traditional ML tactics. And it may be that your client is okay with you using those kind of capabilities when interacting with their documents, but they might have a totally different policy for using a input-output large language model that can actually generate text, or using workflows that leverage those kind of models. And so we actually have arrived at the conclusion that we need to have two separate policies in our kind of DLP solution in order to support this.
We probably can spend much more time on this. I just wonder, Megan, before we bring the feedback slide, other than Lega, is there any other tools that you know that can help you as a firm-wide to decide which tools can use what?
You mean sort of these connectors, like the bringing everyone together type tools?
Governance, yeah.
No, not really. I mean, this is something that we're actually doing internally right now. So not to my knowledge, but would love to hear if others are using anyone.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Megan and Scott. You've got the contact information. This is for your feedback. Please, Megan and Scott would love to know what you think, and also we would love to know what you think. And the survey also asks you if there are any other topics you would like to talk. So this was the first Cleary Plus vendor webinar. Next week, we've got Janine, who's going to join Barry. We're going to talk about KM plus AI equals more BD, and how to activate KM and AI to help the firm get bottom line results. So looking forward to seeing everyone next Friday. Thank you again, Megan and Scott. And you guys get the recording later on. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Scott.